All right. Welcome, everybody. It's good to be here tonight. Yeah, good to be here tonight. I've been looking forward to this evening. I do want to let you know next week, I have a special guest lined up to be with me. I will have my mind's going blank. Dan Marsden. I'll have Dan Marsden from he is with the Louisville Police Department. Dan will be on with me next week as a guest to talk about the connection between addiction and crime, and specifically to discuss the connection between addiction and homelessness. Dan works with the homeless population in Louisville, and we'll be talking about those two things next Tuesday evening. I'm excited to have that coming up. I hope everybody can make it back next week to be with us as we take a look at that. And then tonight, we have a topic tonight. Our topic tonight is going to be stress and recovery. The idea that what we do with our stress matters. What we do with our stress is important. And so we'll be talking about that this evening. Now, I do want to let you know that whether you're watching here with me live tonight or whether you're watching this as it's posted later here on Facebook and on YouTube, I want to invite you, as you check in the comments, let me know where you're checking in from. I like to know where everybody is listening in from. And also, tonight, while we're talking, feel free to drop any comments or questions into the comments section here. And you can do that even if you're watching on a replay. Check comments later and try to respond to those. Any comments and questions that are left later as you're watching this as a recorded event. And so I'm feeling like I'm going to sneeze. You guys know I've struggled all winter long with congestion. It's actually warm today. It's been into the 80s here today. I managed to get out, take a walk, a couple miles this afternoon. That was pleasant. I'm excited about that, to be back able to walk. But now all the pollen and everything's kicking up. So I'm still struggling with congestion. Got my cough drops and all here with me, but I am feeling like I could sneeze at some point. So, yeah, tonight, our topic this evening, stress and recovery. So here's where I want to start. Most relapse, most of our struggles, most of our relapse don't begin with behavior. We've talked about that in the past. Relapse doesn't begin when we cross that line with our drug of choice or with that behavior that we struggle with. Relapse begins sometimes days or even weeks prior to that. And one of the ways that relapse sometimes starts for us is with how we handle stress. So tonight we'll be talking about stress. We're not going to be talking about eliminating it. That's not what we're going to talk about. That's not really realistic. Stress is a part of life. So we're not going to talk about eliminating it, but understanding stress. We're going to talk about what it is, what it does to us, and how do we handle stress in life. Stress is a part of it. So the question to begin with is, what is stress? What I find is that, and I'll just talk for me here, but I have a tendency to throw around words, sometimes for years or even decades, without having a real clear understanding of what it is that I'm talking about, a real clear definition. And so I want to start tonight with the idea of what is stress. Stress is the body's response to a perceived demand or a threat. Let me repeat that. Stress is the body's response to a perceived demand or a threat. Stress is not just about danger, although it is about danger when we feel that there's danger present. Stress is also about pressure. It's about expectations, not just expectations that other people put on us. It can be expectations that we place on ourselves. And so we need to be aware of that. Stress is related to uncertainty. None of us like uncertainty. Uncertainty is not a pleasant thing. And our brain perceives uncertainty many times as danger, and connected to fear. And change creates stress, even good change. Change like getting a promotion at work, or getting a new house. Whatever it may be, change, even good change, can produce stress in our body because we sense it, we perceive it as uncertainty. And so, kind of a simple explanation, going a little bit deeper here, is the idea that our brain, specifically the amygdala, and we've talked about the amygdala before. The amygdala is a part of our brain that is designed to sense danger or risk. And the amygdala, I like to think of the amygdala as like that sonar on a submarine. We've seen maybe the movies where you're on the control deck of the submarine, people are talking, moving around, but in the background, you've got that sonar ping that's sending out a signal that bounces back and tells us if there's danger there, nearby, something that we could run into, or something that could cause us harm. And the amygdala operates a lot like that in our brain. So the amygdala, it senses something important. Now that could be danger. It could just be something important, something that it perceives as needing our attention. And when the amygdala is triggered, when it's set off, it signals our body to begin to release stress chemicals. These would be stress chemicals like adrenaline or cortisol, which activate our body. What those chemicals do, those brain chemicals, is they prepare our body for action. It's those chemicals in the response of our brainstem to those chemicals that put us into that fight, flight, or freeze state. We've all heard about that state before, fight, flight, or freeze. And those chemicals are designed to keep us in that state for a while so that we don't relax too soon and end up getting hurt. So, in a nutshell, stress is my body saying to me, communicating to me, something here is important. Something here matters. It's not always about danger. Sometimes it is, but it's often about things that have meaning or things that our brain perceives as being important. So, how do we typically respond to stress? Most of us don't struggle with stress itself. What we tend to struggle with is how we respond to stress. Stress happens, it's just a part of life. The question is, how are we going to respond to it? Are we going to respond to it in a healthy way or in an unhealthy way? So let's take a few minutes here and look at some common responses to stress. The first thing we'll look at here is the idea of avoidance or escape. You remember I said that the amygdala triggers our body to produce stress hormones, and those activate our brainstem and our body and kick us into fight, flight, or freeze. That avoidance escape response is that flight response. And that doesn't mean that we just run. But it can also mean that we go to work to try to escape what we're feeling and what we're experiencing. And that escape can come in several ways. That attempt to escape from stress can take place through numbing. For instance, alcohol use, to dull our senses, dull our brain, calm ourselves down. It's an attempt to self-regulate, but it becomes an escape tool. It can be things like pornography. We move to pornography in order to escape that stress and that pressure that we're experiencing in the present. It can be something as simple as scrolling on our device. Scrolling, trying to escape and distract ourselves with something on our phone or on our tablet. One way that we try to avoid an escape that I notice a lot, and I try to speak to, it really concerns me with those of us that are in recovery, is some people try to avoid an escape through busyness. Now, here's the thing with busyness. Busyness is not necessarily always bad, but here's what I see often with people that are in recovery. I will hear statements like, I just try to keep myself so busy, I don't have time to get in trouble. And so we begin to work longer hours, or we begin to get caught up in all the activities that are at home or to be out and active. And there's nothing wrong with being active. But the idea of busyness, busyness can actually be beneficial in recovery early on. While we are getting established in recovery, while we are developing daily disciplines. But when we continue to practice busyness for the sake of being busy in an attempt to escape from those feelings and that stress that we're experiencing, it becomes danger for us, because Busyness will eventually wear us down and wear us out. We can't maintain busyness forever. And eventually we wear ourselves out, we wear ourselves down, and we collapse. And bad things happen. We also, excuse me there, my knee was itching. We also can try to avoid and escape through isolation. I'm going to get everybody away. I'm not going to let anybody near, not let anybody close. I'm not going to open up to anybody in an attempt to isolate and to keep myself safe from people that might cause me harm or might aggravate me. And here's the problem with avoidance and escape. When we try to avoid and escape, we don't remove the stress. What we do is we end up leaving ourselves. We become something that we're not in order to escape. We leave ourselves, we lose ourselves in that avoidance. A second way that we respond to stress is with control. Now, here's the thing about control. Almost always when we move towards control, that's a fear response. You may be used to hearing me talk a lot about our feelings. And feelings are an important part of our life. The move to control is a fear response. In control, we jump in and we try to fix everything. And I got news for you. Not everything can be fixed. Not everything needs to be fixed. Not everything is capable of being fixed. Sometimes that control, that attempt to control, takes the shape of trying to manage others or to micromanage others. We want to begin to dictate what people around us are going to do. And we attempt to manage others. Or we move towards perfectionism. Now, here's something that you may push back on a little bit. Feel free to. But I really believe that all addicts, by nature, are perfectionists. You say, how can we be perfectionists when everything is so messed up? We are perfectionists, and it's that perfectionism, that desire, that attempt to make everything right, to get everything right, to relieve all the pressure, to control everything. Well, that stems from perfectionism. And again, it's a fear response. The thought that we're operating off of is, if I can control it, I don't have to feel it. And what we're really doing there is it's another attempt, another way to try to avoid feelings, to try to avoid uncertainty. Control, traditionally for me in my active addiction, control was an automatic go-to. And it's been in recovery that I've realized that was dictated by fear. I hated to admit that. Last thing in the world I want to admit is that I'm afraid of anything. But all of us struggle to some degree with fear. Can you relate to that? That idea, if I can control it, I don't have to feel it. And then a third common response to stress is to shut down. Now, in this response and shutting down, we immediately move into an attempt to numb out. to disengage. We try to disengage from ourselves. We disengage from others that are around us. We disengage from our environment. We take on an I don't care mindset. The problem with that is we're lying to ourselves because we do care. And that stress remains present in our body. It's still there. A fourth way that we respond is something called spiritual bypassing. Now, you may or may not be familiar with that term, spiritual bypassing. Those of us that have grown up in or been around religious environments, we can move towards this really quick. And a lot of times it's because of what we've been told and taught in that environment. Most of you know I'm a Christian. I'm active in church. I was in the ministry for years, even while I was struggling with active addiction. But I am a believer in Christ, a believer in faith. In spiritual bypassing, we tell ourselves, oh, I'm stressed out. I'm struggling. Well, I just need to pray more. I just need to read my Bible more. And here's the thing with that. Praying more is a good thing. Reading your Bible more is a good thing. But it's not necessarily the answer to your problem. Not alone, not by itself. You know, I have heard over my lifetime, I don't think that I did this when I was a pastor, but I may have. And if I did, and you've heard me do it, I apologize. But I've heard people say, if you just read your Bible, it'll set you free from everything. And sometimes they'll try to use that verse, Romans 12, 1 and 2, about renewing your mind. Renewing of the mind is an important thing. It talks about how we think. It talks about daily disciplines, practices, tools we can use. That's all a process of renewing our mind. But that's not directly related to reading our Bible all the time. In fact, people, good Christian people, sometimes get frustrated with me when I tell them, you know, daily Bible reading wasn't even a thing until into the 1700s. It was in the 1600s when the printing press was invented. Prior to that, very few people had Bibles. And so the idea of reading your Bible regularly, every morning, reading it through in a year, all those things that we're told we're supposed to do as a Christian, those things didn't even exist before that time. And again, those aren't bad things today. But in and of themselves, they may not be the full answer. And with spiritual bypassing, turning to those things to try to create change often leads to skipping emotional honesty. We even sometimes in that spiritual bypassing, we tell ourselves, well, don't ever admit that you're afraid. Don't ever admit that you're angry. Don't admit your feelings. And I got to tell you, that is not a Christian concept. Read the book of Psalms. All through the book of Psalms, the writer of Psalms, some of that is David. The writer of Psalms is vomiting emotions all over everybody around him. And processing and dealing with our emotions are something that are encouraged all through the scripture. Not hiding from them, not trying to press them down, not trying to run from them and avoid them, but being honest about what we're feeling. And I got news for you. God's big enough that he can deal with your anger or your hurt or your sadness or your loneliness. He's big enough to deal with your feelings and with your emotions. And then the last thing that I'll talk about, a way that we respond to stress, is we become reactionary, or we kick into fight mode. In that reactionary mode, in that reactionary response, we become irritable. Stress hits, we become irritable, we become angry. We begin to look many times for reasons to blame other people for our struggles. One of the problems I have with that, when I become reactionary in my response to stress, is that it can be pretty common for me to blame the people that mean the most to me and the people that I'm the closest to. They're the easiest ones to blame because they're the people that I'm around the most. But all of these things are common responses to our stress. And these responses are not random. These responses to stress are attempts to regulate our discomfort. That's what we're after. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're turning to our addictions for, to our alcohol, to the drugs, to the porn, to the other compulsive behaviors. We're turning to those things in an attempt to regulate the discomfort that the stress creates in our body. Every one of these responses is an attempt to solve a feeling without actually addressing it. We're trying to skirt around the problem. So, if these things that I've just talked about, that I've just brought up, if these things don't work long term, then what does? What does work long term to deal with the stress that we experience? Now, I'm going to go back to a statement that I use all the time. You hear this almost every time that I'm on here. Let me grab a drink real quick. That statement is this: behind every behavior is a feeling, and behind every feeling is a need. And again, where I always go with that is the idea that our behaviors, our addictions, our struggles, we focus on those things because those are the things that cause the immediate pain in our life. But they're not the core root of the problem. So, step one in dealing in having a healthy response to stress, step one is awareness. We need to name it. We need to name what's happening and what we're feeling in our bodies. We ask ourselves the question, what am I feeling? We slow things down. Now, some of you are thinking, well, I've already recognized it. I feel stress. But I'm going to tell you, stress isn't a feeling. Stress is one of those words that we mistake as a feeling, but it's not the feeling itself. So we slow things down and we ask ourselves, what am I feeling? Do not use the word stress. A lot of times in groups and with guys that I hang out with, I'll ask them, what are you feeling today? Most guys respond with, I feel good or I feel fine. And then they get upset because I respond with, no, you don't. Those things aren't feelings. Those are words that you've learned to use to avoid having to think about what you're feeling. Stress is used in that same way. I feel stressed. What feeling is that connected to? I'm not feeling just stressed. Maybe what I'm feeling is overwhelmed. Maybe what I'm feeling is anxious. Maybe I'm feeling pressured through expectations that are being placed on me by others or even by myself. Maybe I'm feeling afraid. Now, I don't know about you, but that afraid, that idea of fear, I've already said this. That's the last thing that I want to admit to, that I'm afraid. But when we can be honest, when we can begin with that question, what am I feeling? We have to slow things down to figure that out. What am I feeling? If I can slow down and name that, if I can name it, I can begin to work with it. Because there is a healthy response, a healthy way to process each of our feelings. If I can name it, I can begin to work with it. You can too. Step 2, curiosity. Number 1, we begin by naming what we're feeling. Step 2, curiosity. We start to dig in a little bit. What's this stress really about? What is it that's causing this to happen in my body? A good question to ask in step 2 is, what feels at risk for me right now? What's the expectation that's present? What am I afraid of not being able to live up to or not being able to meet? Curiosity. That's something that we're not used to using. Remember, addiction tells us to escape. Curiosity tells us to dig in and find what's really at work there. So, what are some things that may feel at risk? What are some ways we can verbalize that? Well, examples about that curiosity and that feeling of risk could be things like, I'm afraid that I can't do this. I'm afraid of failure. Again, that goes back to the idea of fear. It can be maybe a fear of rejection. This stress is coming from a fear that I'm not going to live up to expectations and I'll be rejected. It may be that what's feeling at risk right now is a fear of not being enough. And so we begin to dig in and we begin to look for the root cause. What's not at the behavior, but at what's behind the behavior. Got a train going by, my window's open, so maybe a little loud for just a moment. But we dig behind the behavior. If all we do is stay focused on the behavior, we'll never experience freedom. The behavior is the effect, not the cause. So curiosity, what's behind what I'm experiencing? Again, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough, not being able to live up to the expectations that have been given by me or by others. And then step 3 is regulation, self-regulation. Here's the idea with that. Regulation, a good definition of regulation is care for our body. Our body is a lot more important to our recovery than what many of us realize. Maybe you're familiar with that book. It's been really popular. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And that book speaks to a lot of things that we experience in stress, tightness in our shoulders, maybe a little upset in the stomach. And so with regulation, we look for tools that we can use to calm ourselves and to practice self-care. This can be breathing exercises. I was always resistant to those. They didn't make sense to me until I began to recognize that they really did help to calm me. And I found that, I've shared before, I discovered that through physicals that I used to have to get when I drove a truck for my CDL license. I had that white coat syndrome. My blood pressure would be perfect all the time, but when I walked into a doctor's office, it'd go through the roof. And it was a nice nurse in a doctor's office while I was having a meltdown because of fear that my license would get pulled. And the nurse told me, we can fix this. I'm going to dim the lights, turn on some music, and you're going to breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. And it worked. My blood pressure came down, my heart rate slowed. Breathing, it helps to regulate our bodies. We talked earlier about the amygdala. We've talked about this in the past. When we begin breathing, that deep breath in, that breath out, that slow breath out, that communicates to my brain, specifically to my amygdala, oh, wait a minute. Maybe this isn't as scary as I thought it was. He's taking deep breaths. He wouldn't be taking deep breaths if he thought he was going to die. And our brain almost immediately begins to come back online. And our system begins to call. We slow down. We stop and we focus on what's happening here right now. As I'm breathing, I slow down. I close my eyes. I begin to feel my body. I focus, maybe. I keep my eyes open and I focus on things that are right here, things that I can see, things that I can maybe smell, things that I can hear. It can be that I step away for a quick break. It may just be movement in my body. I get up and I take a walk right around the office and back to my seat. Movement can help my body to regulate. You don't solve stress in a dysregulated body. We have to begin to calm our body, to care for our body in order for us to experience relief from stress. Step 4, only got 2 more steps. Step 4 is connection. We talk a lot about the importance of connection. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is healthy community. We refuse to do it alone. We refuse to isolate. So, connection, we reach out. We pick up that phone and we call somebody. We talk to somebody there in the office with us. Share with them, I'm a little stressed. I'm a little dysregulated. If you're married and you're at home, your spouse is a good one to turn to. Hey, can we talk for a minute? I'm just feeling a little dysregulated. We reach out. We be known. That means we become a little vulnerable. And we are becoming vulnerable when we share, hey, I'm feeling a little dysregulated right now. And as we do that, we share honestly. When somebody says, okay, how are you feeling? How are you doing? We don't lie to them and to ourselves and say, I'm fine, everything's good. We speak honestly. I'm feeling a little dysregulated right now. I don't know for sure that I can live up to what I'm expected to do here. I'm feeling some stress in my shoulders. Stress grows in isolation, just like our addictions. Our addictions grow in isolation. Stress grows in isolation. And like our addiction, stress shrinks when we experience healthy connection. Healthy connection. It's one of the keys to success in recovery, healthy recovery, and success in dealing with stress. And then step 5, this is an internal response. And we need to see it as that it's a response, not a reaction. A reaction happens in the immediate. It's that knee-jerk reaction. A response, we've paused, we've taken a breath, we've done some of these things that we talked about here. We've taken a breath. We've exercised some curiosity about what we're experiencing. And we make an intentional response. A response indicates that we've taken a minute or two to think about it, to process. And in that intentional response, we ask a couple of questions. What would be a healthy next step? And what do I actually need right now? Remember my saying, behind every behavior is a feeling. We've already asked and identified feelings, what we're feeling. We've expressed curiosity about that. And now we're asking, what is the need that's present in my life? When I can refocus off of the behavior, identify the feelings, and recognize the need, I can experience relief. What would be a healthy next step? And what do I actually need right now in the present? So here's a practical tool for you. I'm going back to something that I talk about a lot. This is the check-in model that I use with myself. But I also often share what I come up with in this check-in model with those people that I'm connecting with in the moment. And here's what we're talking about. Some of these things we've already mentioned. What am I feeling? I pause and I identify, what am I feeling? I'm not feeling good. I'm not feeling fine. Those are not feelings. I'm actually not feeling stress. It's not a feeling. What am I feeling? I'm feeling some fear. I'm feeling maybe a little sadness. I'm feeling maybe a little lonely. What am I feeling? Question number 1. Question number 2 in my check-in model. What am I thinking? What's on my mind today? Again, this might go back to the expectations that I think I have to live up to. I'm thinking about the bills that are coming due. I'm thinking about keeping my boss happy at work. What am I thinking about right now? What am I doing? What am I doing? That can be a little broader question, What am I doing is going to include things like, what have I been doing today? Who have I been around today? Where have I been today? What activities have I been involved in? We exercise curiosity here. Sometimes it's through these questions that we begin to identify patterns. You know, when I'm around this certain person, that's a common theme in my stress and in what I experience in a negative way. When I'm around this certain place, this certain thing, what have I been doing today? And then question number 4, what am I thinking about doing? And I've shared this many times. There's all kinds of research out there about it. It began with research on alcohol use, a study a number of years ago that found that for people who struggle with alcohol, they're more likely to relapse on Sunday evenings. Now, why would that be? Well, the research actually came up with an answer. It said Sunday evenings, our mindset begins to change. We move from thinking about the weekend. On Sunday evening, we begin to think about going back to work tomorrow. And a lot of us don't like our jobs, or we don't like somebody we work with, or we don't like a project that's coming up. And we begin to think about our job, and that causes stress, that causes dysregulation in our bodies. And we don't handle that in a healthy way with some of the steps we've been talking about today. And we end up acting out. We end up in relapse. And over the years, I've talked with a number of people who struggle in a number of areas who've all recognized some of the same things. A number of people that struggle with things like sex addiction, for instance, and pornography. A number of people that struggle in that area have been able to identify Sunday evenings a regular thing for them. Back in the day, I've shared this story in the past. I recognized through my journaling and through these 4 questions, I generally tended to struggle more on Wednesday evenings, and there was a reason behind that. A pattern that I was able to identify and able to adjust and to make plans for. Began to experience freedom in that area and in that time frame. So 4 questions, a check-in with yourself, and something that you can share with the person that you're connecting with. What am I feeling? What am I thinking? What am I doing? And what am I thinking about doing? 4 questions. And it's through questions like this, through processing things like this, that we begin to catch stress before it becomes relapse. We identify the struggle, identify the feeling. Through the curiosity, we're able to begin to recognize the need, and we catch the stress before it moves to relapse. So, again, kind of backing up here, go back to one of the first statements that I made. Relapse is often, not always, but often a response to unmanaged stress that lingers over time. Relapse doesn't begin with behavior. Relapse begins with disconnection. Disconnection from other people, which manifests as isolation, and disconnection from ourselves. Back to our check-in questions. We stop thinking about and examining what we're feeling, what we're thinking, what we're doing, what we're thinking about doing. Disconnection from others, disconnection from myself. So how do we tie what we've been talking about together as we come towards the end here? Stress. We identify stress in our life, stress in our body. That's usually how we identify stress. We experience stress as a tightness in our neck and in our shoulders. We experience it as discomfort in our stomach. We might recognize stress because all of a sudden our leg starts to bounce. Now, here's how I identify stress. For me, it's not my leg bouncing. It might be some tightness in my shoulders. But when I'm struggling with stress, I interlace my fingers and I take my thumbnails and I start to flip them like that. Now, why do I do that? I don't have a clue. But I have identified that that is an indicator that I'm experiencing stress. And you have indicators in your life too. So we tie it together. Stress. We recognize that we're experiencing stress. That stress becomes feelings in our body. And this is the unhealthy progression. That stress becomes feelings in our body. Tightness in my shoulders. Yep. That's a big one. I recognize that one. Legs bouncing. Yep. Hey, Elizabeth, you remember John Wren. John would get his leg to bouncing so much, he'd shake that whole trailer he lived in. And that shaking in his leg would move, shaking and then rocking in his body, and then his body would begin to jerk. Stress. We all experience it in different ways. In that unhealthy progression, stress, it begins to show up through dysregulation and feelings. And as we experience that, we move into avoidance. That can be avoidance demonstrated as isolation from other people. It can be avoidance through things like we begin to scroll on our phones. We're trying to disconnect mentally. That avoidance can take place in all kinds of ways. And as we begin to move into that avoidance, that disconnection, eventually that results in behavior, which may manifest as a relapse. Now, the healthy version of that, the healthy response to that is we recognize the stress, tightness in our shoulders, little discomfort in the stomach, our legs bouncing, I'm rocking. For me, you remember this, Elizabeth, I sit and I flip those thumbnails. Your mother used to get furious about that. She hated when I did that. So the stress, we recognize through the behaviors, the stress. That brings about awareness. Oh, something's happening here that's not healthy for me. And as we make that awareness, we choose to move towards connection and healthy action. The things that I've walked us through this evening. Healthy tools, healthy check-ins with ourselves and with others. So, in wrapping things up, here are the key takeaways I have for you tonight. Things that I want you to remember. First of all, stress is not the enemy. Stress is not the enemy. How we react to the stress, that's where the problem comes. And it's avoidance. When we respond, not react, when we react to the stress, we move into avoidance. And in avoidance, we begin to isolate. we begin to look for ways to escape. That usually doesn't immediately mean that we return to our old addictive behaviors. We start to scroll. We start to isolate. We start to shut down emotionally. And that's the beginning of that downward spiral. Stress is not the enemy. Avoidance really is the problem. And then awareness, an awareness of what's happening. Yes, I'm experiencing stress. Stress is a part of life. We normally can't eliminate it. So, how do I respond to it in a healthy way? Awareness and connection is the path. Stress isn't something that we eliminate. Stress is something that we learn to move through in a healthy way. Something that we learn to move through in a healthy way. So here's my question for you tonight. I always try to end with a question. What do you tend to do when you feel stressed? Do you avoid? Do you avoid people? Do you begin to avoid and hide from your feelings? Do you move towards control? I try to control the situation. I try to control others around me. Control is always a fear response. We hate to hear that because none of us want to believe we're afraid. But when we move towards control, that's always a fear response. Or do we shut down? Do we move to try to numb out? What do you tend to do when you feel stressed? Do you avoid? Do you control? Do you shut down? And what's that healthy process that we can put in place to take care of that? I want to invite you, if you're not doing so yet, follow me here on Facebook, my website, on the homepage of my website. I have all of my social media accounts there where you can connect and follow. This video will stay up here on Facebook for 30 days, and then Facebook removes it. But later tonight, this will be on YouTube, and it'll be on YouTube forever. And so if you've heard something that's been beneficial, something that you think might be good for somebody else, feel free to share it here on one of my other platforms. Or you can always reach out and email me at rwcoaching2@gmail.com. Now, again, one last reminder. Next week, I have a guest with me. He is an officer with the Louisville Police Department, and his name is Dan Marsden. He'll be here with me next week to talk with me. We'll discuss the connection between crime and addiction. And we'll also discuss specifically the connection between addiction and homelessness. Dan works with a division of the Louisville Police that's connected specifically to the homeless community. And so those are two aspects that we'll be discussing here next week on Let's Talk Recovery. 8 p.m. Tuesday next week. I want to invite you to come back. When you're here, bring questions. If you have questions for Dan, something in regards to addiction and crime or addiction and homelessness, if you have comments, maybe you've experienced that yourself. You know, my experience has been addiction and incarceration. Bring those questions, bring those comments, and join us next week. I look forward to seeing you then. Have a good evening.